Juliet, we know you are our friend, but do you even look at yourself in the mirror? Look who will even marry you. You don't even stand a chance.
Hello, beautiful. Will you marry me?
Juliet felt the restaurant go silent the moment the chair cracked beneath her weight. For one terrifying second, she froze in humiliation as loud laughter exploded around the room. Phones came out instantly. Some people covered their mouths while others pointed openly at her. Her hands trembled as she struggled to stand, her face burning with shame, her eyes already filling with tears. Then suddenly, a deep, angry voice cut through the laughter. Enough! The entire restaurant turned toward the tall, handsome billionaire walking toward Juliet with fire in his eyes. Instead of mocking her like everyone else, he gently pulled another chair beside hers, helped her sit comfortably, then looked around the room and said, "The cruelest people are usually the emptiest inside." Juliet stared at him in shock as tears rolled down her cheeks, because after years of being treated like a joke, this was the first time someone made her feel human. Now, before we begin the story, kindly click that subscribe button so you can see us again. Juliet was the kind of woman whose heart was too soft for the cruel world she lived in. She laughed easily, cared deeply, and always tried to make others happy, even when sadness lived quietly inside her chest. In the small office where she worked as a receptionist for a poor salary, everybody knew her as the cheerful woman who always greeted people with a smile and helped others finish their work. But behind those smiles was a woman slowly breaking apart. Juliet was very overweight, and because of that, people treated her as though she was less human than everyone else. Every morning, before entering the office, she would stand outside the building for a few seconds, take a deep breath, and prepare herself for another day of insults disguised as jokes. One hot afternoon, she visited a tailor to sew a dress for her cousin's wedding. The tailor wrapped the measuring tape around Juliet's body, hissed loudly, then called another worker. "Come and see this one," she laughed. "If I use one full material, it still won't reach." The workers burst into laughter. Juliet forced herself to laugh too, even though her fingers quietly tightened around her handbag. "Auntie, just sew the dress," she said softly. Sorry, the tailor replied mockingly. "I was only joking. Don't be too sensitive." But Juliet's eyes were already watery. Another evening, she followed her friends to a lounge where music played loudly and lights flashed across the room. Slim, beautiful women walked around confidently while men rushed to buy them drinks. Juliet sat quietly beside Vanessa and smiled awkwardly whenever men greeted the table without even looking at her. One man finally glanced at Juliet and whispered to his friend, not quietly enough, "If she steps on my leg, I'll be in hospital for 3 weeks." The men laughed cruelly. Juliet pretended not to hear and sipped her drink slowly while her heart sank deeper inside her chest. Even children mocked her openly. One afternoon, while walking home with groceries, 2 little boys pointed at her from across the street. "Look," one shouted loudly, "Big Mommy is coming." They both laughed wildly, while their mother simply smiled instead of correcting them. Juliet lowered her head and kept walking, as though she did not hear them, but the tears forming in her eyes blurred the road ahead of her. At family gatherings, things were even worse. Her aunties spoke carelessly, as if Juliet was not sitting right there with them. "This one should focus on making money," one aunt said while chewing meat loudly. "Men don't marry women like her." Another relative added, "Unless the man is blind." The room filled with laughter.
Juliet smiled weakly and joked back, "Then I'll find a blind millionaire." Everyone laughed again, but nobody noticed the pain hiding behind her eyes. The truth was, Juliet had mastered the painful art of laughing at herself before others could hurt her more. But the people who wounded Juliet the deepest were the ones she called friends. Vanessa was the leader of the group, beautiful, confident, and dangerously cruel. She always smiled while saying the most hurtful things. Chloe acted sweet in public, but her words cut like knives. Anita cared about nothing except social media and recording every embarrassing moment she could post online. Sonia followed the others like a shadow because she was too weak to stand alone. Juliet stayed with them because deep down she was terrified of being lonely. Whenever they went out to eat, the girls would order extra food and laugh loudly. "Juliet will finish it," Vanessa would say. She was born prepared for moments like this. The table would explode with laughter while Juliet forced herself to smile, even though humiliation burned inside her stomach. During selfies, Chloe would suddenly shout, "Wait, Juliet is blocking the whole camera." Anita would quickly edit Juliet's body before posting the pictures online. Sometimes she made her look wider on purpose while adding laughing emojis. One evening during a birthday party, music filled the room and everyone began dancing happily. Finally, Juliet forgot her pain for a moment and started moving her body freely with a genuine smile on her face. But suddenly, Anita pointed her phone at her and laughed. "Look at the ground shaking," Vanessa screamed. The girls held each other laughing uncontrollably while nearby strangers turned to stare at Juliet mockingly. Slowly, Juliet stopped dancing. Her smile disappeared, but she still laughed along with them because she feared that if she stopped laughing, the tears in her eyes would finally fall.
One Friday evening after work, Vanessa slammed her phone excitedly on the table inside the small restaurant where the girls usually gathered. "Beach trip!" she shouted happily. "Luxury beach resort this weekend!" Chloe screamed in excitement, while Anita immediately started talking about pictures and videos for social media. Sonia clapped her hands like a child. Juliet tried to smile, but fear quietly entered her chest. She looked down at her drink before speaking softly. "Beach?" Vanessa rolled her eyes immediately. "Yes, beach, don't start." Juliet forced a nervous laugh. "I'm just saying, maybe I won't fit into all those beach clothes." Anita burst into laughter. "Please don't tell me you want to wear jeans inside water." The girls laughed loudly. Juliet smiled weakly, even though her embarrassment warmed her face. "I'm serious," she whispered. "People will stare at me." Vanessa leaned closer and said impatiently, "Juliet, stop behaving like the whole world is looking at you. Nobody cares." Chloe nodded quickly. "Exactly. Just come and have fun for once." Deep inside, Juliet still wanted to refuse, but the fear of being left out was stronger than her shame, so she agreed quietly. The day of the trip finally arrived. The beach was beautiful, filled with loud music, colorful umbrellas, expensive cars, and laughing groups of friends. Juliet stepped out of her car slowly, wearing a long cover-up over her swimsuit while holding her bag tightly against her body. Immediately, she noticed people glancing at her. Her confidence disappeared at once. Vanessa hissed and said, "Why are you dressed like somebody's auntie?" Chloe laughed. "At this point, just enter the water with blanket." The girls laughed loudly. Juliet smiled weakly, even though her chest already felt heavy. But as the day continued, something surprising happened. Slowly, Juliet began relaxing. The ocean breeze touched her skin gently. She laughed sincerely for the first time in a long while. She ate grilled fish beside the water, took pictures of the sunset, and even forgot her insecurities for a few precious moments. Then, music started playing near the pool area. People gathered around dancing happily. Vanessa grabbed Juliet's hand. "Come and dance now." Juliet resisted at first. "No, please." But the girls dragged her forward laughing. At first, Juliet moved shyly, but slowly she relaxed again. She laughed loudly while dancing freely, her body moving without fear for years. People around even smiled kindly at her confidence. But standing behind her, Anita quietly removed her phone and started recording from a cruel angle that made Juliet's body look even larger. Vanessa saw the recording and covered her mouth, trying not to laugh. "This is good," she whispered. A few minutes later, while Juliet sat happily near the pool drinking juice, Vanessa uploaded the video online with the caption, "When the tsunami starts dancing." The girls exploded into uncontrollable laughter. "Read the comments," shouted Chloe excitedly. Juliet collected the phone curiously, still smiling. But the moment she saw the post, her entire body froze. Thousands of people were already reacting. "Earthquake warning. The pool water is suffering. This is not dancing. This is natural disaster." Her smile disappeared slowly. "Vanessa," she whispered painfully. Vanessa continued laughing. "Oh, calm down. It's just jokes." But the video kept spreading faster every second. By evening, complete strangers were reposting it everywhere. People created memes from her body. Fake edited videos appeared online showing buildings shaking while she danced. Popular pages reposted the clip. Influencers made reaction videos mocking her openly. Even radio presenters joked about her the next morning. One presenter laughed loudly on air and said, "If you see Juliet dancing near your house, just run for safety." The entire studio burst into laughter. Juliet became a citywide joke overnight. At work, people whispered whenever she passed. Some secretly watched the video while pretending not to look at her. Others laughed openly. Juliet stopped lifting her head while walking. Everywhere she went felt unsafe. That night, she locked herself inside her apartment and switched off her phone completely. Days passed. She stopped answering calls. She ignored messages from work. The curtains in her room remained closed while darkness filled the apartment, like sorrow itself lived there. Sometimes she stayed in bed the entire day, staring silently at the ceiling. Sometimes she cried until her chest hurt. Food spoiled untouched in her kitchen because she no longer cared to eat properly. One painful evening, she opened her social media pages and slowly deleted almost every picture of herself. Each deleted photo felt like she was erasing pieces of her existence. Then she stood in front of her mirror, wearing only a loose shirt. Her swollen eyes studied her reflection silently. She grabbed the flesh around her stomach tightly as tears rolled down her cheeks. "Why?" she whispered brokenly. "Why was I created like this?" Her voice cracked painfully.
"What did I do to deserve this body?" She slowly slid down onto the floor, crying uncontrollably. But even in her suffering, the world showed her no mercy. One afternoon, her aunt visited her apartment after hearing about the viral video. Instead of comforting her, the woman shook her head disapprovingly. "This is why women should control themselves," she said coldly while looking at Juliet's body. "Do you think men like this kind of thing?" Juliet stared silently at the floor while tears dropped onto her hands. Her aunt continued carelessly. "You people now call everything body positivity until the world embarrasses you." The woman stood up afterwards and left without hugging her once. That night, Juliet cried herself to sleep again, hugging her pillow tightly in the darkness, while the cruel laughter from the internet echoed endlessly inside her mind. Far away from the noise and laughter of the internet, inside a quiet glass office high above the city, a man named Marcus watched the viral video everybody was mocking. The huge television on the wall replayed Juliet dancing beside the pool, while cruel comments flooded the screen below. The men sitting around Marcus laughed carelessly. "The internet has found today's entertainment," one of them said. Another shook his head, laughing. This woman should sue her friends for wickedness. But Marcus said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on Juliet's face. While others saw her body, Marcus noticed something else. He noticed the way her smile suddenly faded after reading the comments. He noticed the embarrassment hiding behind her laughter. He noticed the sadness in her eyes, the kind of sadness people carry after surviving years of humiliation. Slowly, Marcus muted the television. The room became quiet immediately. One of his business partners laughed awkwardly. "Boss, don't tell me you are feeling bad for her." Marcus leaned back calmly. "Everybody in this room laughed at her body," he said quietly. "But none of you noticed she looked like someone already used to pain." The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Marcus was not like most rich men. Though he was young, handsome, and powerful, life had taught him to value hearts more than appearances.
He had grown up watching his late mother suffer humiliation because of her appearance and poor background before becoming successful later in life. Since then, Marcus had hated people who judged others cruelly. That night, after everybody left his office, Marcus watched Juliet's video again alone. Then he opened her social media page. Most of the comments were wicked, monster, whale, disaster. But Marcus kept scrolling quietly until he found older pictures of Juliet before the viral scandal. In one picture, she was smiling beside little orphan children while serving them food. In another, she stood proudly beside a birthday cake she baked herself. There was kindness in her smile, warmth, gentleness. Marcus became curious. The next day, he asked his assistant softly, "Find out everything you can about this woman." Days later, Marcus received a full report about Juliet. He read every page carefully in silence. He discovered she worked a low-paying office job despite having excellent baking skills. He discovered she spent part of her salary helping orphan children every month, even though she struggled financially herself. He learned she had been mocked almost her entire life because of her size. He even found old videos of Juliet happily teaching small children how to bake cakes during charity events. One particular video touched him deeply. A little girl had hugged Juliet tightly and said, "Auntie Juliet, you make the best cakes in the world." Juliet laughed warmly and kissed the child's forehead. "Then one day I'll open the biggest bakery for all of you." Marcus paused the video and stared silently at her smiling face. "So this is who you are," he whispered softly to himself. Something about Juliet's pain stayed inside his mind afterward. He could not forget her. One rainy evening, Marcus sat quietly inside his mansion while staring out the window. His older sister Victoria noticed his silence and walked toward him. "You've been distracted all week," she said. "Who is she?" Marcus smiled faintly. "A woman the world decided to destroy because of her body." Victoria sat beside him curiously. Marcus handed her Juliet's file. After reading everything, Victoria sighed sadly. "People can be wicked." Marcus nodded slowly. "Do you know what hurts me most?" he asked quietly. "The fact that she kept smiling while they humiliated her. That kind of smile usually comes from years of suffering." Victoria studied her brother carefully before smiling softly.
"You like her already?" Marcus looked away thoughtfully. "I don't know her yet," he replied. "But I know kindness when I see it." The next morning, Juliet had a knock on her apartment door. She opened it slowly with tired eyes, expecting another cruel visitor or curious neighbor. Instead, she found a delivery man holding a beautiful bouquet of fresh flowers. "Delivery for Miss Juliet," he said politely. Juliet frowned in confusion. "From who?" The man checked the card. "No name." After he left, Juliet slowly opened the small note attached to the flowers. Her trembling eyes read the words carefully. Even wounded flowers still deserve sunlight. Juliet stared at the note for a long time. For the first time in weeks, her heart softened slightly. The next day, another package arrived. This time, it was expensive baking equipment she had once admired online, but could never afford. Mixing bowls, professional decorating tools, luxury cake stands. Juliet covered her mouth in shock. "Who would do this for me?" she whispered. More gifts followed during the next few days. Expensive ingredients, rare baking supplies, boxes of chocolates. Each package carried another handwritten note. One note said, "Your pain is not the end of your story." Another read, "Some people are mocked because the world is too blind to recognize treasure." But one particular note broke something painful and beautiful open inside Juliet's heart. She sat quietly on her bed while reading the words again and again through blurry tears. "The world mocked your body because they could not see your gift." Juliet pressed the note tightly against her chest and cried softly. But this time, her tears felt different. For the first time since the humiliation destroyed her, someone had looked beyond her body and seen something valuable inside her soul. And for the first time in many painful weeks, Juliet smiled again. After many days of darkness and silence, Juliet finally walked into her kitchen again one cold evening. The small room smelled empty and forgotten, like a place that had been abandoned by joy itself. She stood there quietly, staring at the expensive baking equipment the mysterious stranger had sent her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then slowly, she touched one of the mixing bowls with trembling fingers.
Tears gathered in her eyes again. Baking was once the only thing that made her feel beautiful inside, before the world turned her into a joke, before cruel laughter followed her everywhere. The kitchen had been the one place where Juliet forgot her pain. That night, she tied her apron slowly around her waist and whispered softly to herself, "Let me try again." She began mixing cake batter carefully while soft music played from her old phone in the background. But as she stirred the mixture, painful memories returned suddenly. Vanessa laughing at her, strangers mocking her online, children pointing at her body. Juliet stopped stirring as tears rolled down her cheeks and dropped quietly into the batter. She wiped her face quickly and forced herself to continue. Night after night, Juliet remained inside that kitchen long after midnight while the rest of the city slept peacefully. Sometimes she watched baking tutorials for hours, pausing videos repeatedly while trying to learn new techniques. Sometimes she burned entire cakes by mistake and sat on the kitchen floor crying in frustration. One night, smoke filled the kitchen after another failed recipe. Juliet stared at the ruined cakes silently before breaking down completely. "Why can't anything ever work for me?" she cried painfully. But even after crying, she still stood up again, cleaned the kitchen quietly, and started all over. Slowly, something inside her began healing. Decorating cakes became therapy for her wounded heart. Every flower she piped onto frosting felt like stitching broken pieces of herself back together. Every successful recipe gave her tiny moments of confidence she had not felt in years. For the first time in a long while, Juliet started smiling naturally again while baking. One evening, after finishing a beautiful chocolate cake decorated with strawberries, she stared at it proudly for several seconds. Then she picked up her phone and recorded a short video of herself decorating it. She hid her face carefully and posted the clip online anonymously under a small baking page called Sweet Juliet's Kitchen. After posting it, she checked the page repeatedly with nervous excitement. 2 hours later, the video had only 12 views. Juliet smiled sadly. Well, at least 12 people watched. The next day, another video got 30 views. The next one barely reached 15. Nobody really cared. The internet that once spread her humiliation so quickly now ignored her completely. But Juliet continued anyway. Every night after work, she returned home exhausted, changed her clothes, and entered her kitchen again. She posted videos consistently, even when almost nobody watched them. She filmed herself decorating cupcakes, baking vanilla cakes, making caramel toppings, and creating beautiful dessert boxes. Sometimes she spoke softly during the videos. "If your cake cracks a little, don't throw it away," she said gently in one clip. Sometimes imperfect things still become beautiful. The few followers she had slowly began leaving kind comments. "Your voice is calming. Your cakes look amazing. Please post more tutorials." Those little comments warmed Juliet's heart more than people realized. Then, one quiet night, everything changed. Juliet had just fallen asleep on her couch after editing another baking video when her phone suddenly started vibrating non-stop beside her. Half asleep, she opened her eyes in confusion. Notifications flooded her screen endlessly. Messages, comments, followers increasing rapidly every second. Her heart started beating fast. "What is happening?" she whispered nervously. Then she saw it. One of the biggest food bloggers in the country had reposted her video with the caption, "Whoever this woman is, her talent deserves the world's attention." Juliet covered her mouth in shock. Within minutes, her page exploded. Thousands of new followers poured in rapidly. Her inbox filled with messages from people praising her cakes. Strangers shared her videos everywhere. Famous influencers began tagging her page. Orders started entering her messages non-stop. Juliet sat frozen on the couch, staring at her phone, while tears slowly filled her eyes again. But this time, they were not tears of humiliation. For the first time in her life, the same internet that once mocked her body was finally noticing the gift hidden inside her hands. By morning, Juliet's life had changed completely. Her phone would not stop ringing. Notifications flooded her screen so fast she could barely read them. 10,000 followers became 50,000 before afternoon.
By evening, her baking videos spread across the entire country. People became obsessed with the way she decorated cakes so gently, the calmness in her voice, and the beauty she created with her hands. Women reposted her videos with emotional captions. "This woman deserves happiness." The same people they mocked are now blessing the world with talent. Even those who once laughed at her viral humiliation suddenly changed their tone online. The internet that once insulted her body now called her inspiring. Juliet sat quietly on her couch staring at the exploding numbers on her phone with tears gathering in her eyes again and again. "Is this really happening to me?" she whispered softly to herself. Orders started entering faster than she could answer them. Birthday cakes, wedding cakes, luxury dessert tables. Rich families began begging her to bake for their events. Then one afternoon, Juliet nearly dropped her phone in shock after seeing a message from a famous actress. "Hello, Juliet," the message read. "I saw your cakes online and I want you to handle my daughter's birthday." Juliet covered her mouth in disbelief. "God," she whispered shakily, "what is happening?" More celebrities followed. Musicians posted pictures of her desserts online. Influencers praised her creativity. Luxury event planners started calling her daily. One planner visited her tiny kitchen and stared around in shock. "Wait," the woman said, confused. "You made all those cakes here?" Juliet nodded shyly. The planner looked at her carefully before smiling. "You are sitting on a gold mine and you don't even know it yet." For weeks, Juliet barely slept. She baked morning and night while trying to keep up with the endless orders pouring into her life. Her small kitchen became too crowded for her growing success. Boxes filled the living room. Ingredients covered every corner. Sometimes she became so exhausted, she slept sitting upright beside cake boxes, waiting for delivery drivers. But despite the stress, happiness slowly returned to her face. One evening, while packaging desserts, Juliet suddenly paused and smiled to herself. It was the first genuine, peaceful smile she had worn in many years. A few months later, Juliet officially launched her own luxury brand called Juliet's Heaven Desserts. The grand opening of her first bakery shocked everybody who knew her.
The once broken woman who hid inside her apartment now stood proudly inside a beautiful bakery filled with golden lights, elegant decorations, and long lines of customers waiting outside. Television stations came to interview her. During one emotional interview, the host asked gently, "After all the public humiliation you faced, how does this moment feel?" Juliet smiled softly before answering, "Pain can either bury you or grow you. I decided to grow." The clip spread online instantly. Soon Juliet appeared on magazine covers, smiling confidently beside her beautiful cakes. Her online fan base became massive. Women especially loved her because they saw their own insecurities reflected in her journey. People traveled from different cities just to buy desserts from her bakery. Some customers even cried after meeting her in person. "You gave me confidence again," one young woman told her while hugging her tightly. But not everybody celebrated Juliet's success happily. Somewhere inside a small apartment, Vanessa sat scrolling endlessly through Juliet's social media page with bitterness burning inside her chest. Every new achievement felt like a slap to her pride. She watched videos of Juliet giving interviews, smiling confidently, and standing beside celebrities while thousands praised her online. Chloe shook her head in disbelief while staring at the phone. "Can you believe this?" she muttered. "The same Juliet?" Anita hissed bitterly. "People on the internet forget things too fast." Sonia stayed quiet because deep inside, guilt had already started eating her alive. But Vanessa refused to admit the truth. "She got lucky," she said coldly while throwing the phone onto the couch. "That's all." Yet, even as she spoke, jealousy twisted painfully inside her heart because the woman they once treated like a joke had now become everything they secretly wished to be.
every success Juliet achieved reminded Vanessa of one terrible truth she could no longer escape from. The girl they mocked had risen higher than all of them. Several months after Juliet's bakery became successful, the mysterious gifts finally stopped. At first, Juliet felt strangely sad about it. Whoever had sent those notes had appeared in her darkest season, like invisible light, then disappeared quietly without asking for praise or attention. Sometimes, while baking late at night, she would reread the old handwritten notes and wonder softly to herself, "Who are you?" One rainy afternoon, Juliet was inside her office checking dessert orders when her assistant rushed in looking nervous. "Juliet, there's someone important here to see you." Juliet frowned in confusion. "Who?" Before the assistant could answer, the office door opened slowly. Juliet looked up casually, then froze completely. A tall, handsome man walked into the room wearing a dark suit that fit him perfectly. His calm presence alone filled the office quietly with power. Juliet immediately recognized his face from magazines, television interviews, and business news. Marcus Whitmore, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Women online practically worshipped him because of his looks, intelligence, and success. Juliet stood up too quickly in shock. "Marcus Whitmore," she whispered. Marcus smiled softly. "Finally," he said gently. "It's good to meet you properly, Juliet." Her heart began beating nervously. You know me?" Marcus laughed quietly. "I think the whole country knows you now." Juliet suddenly became painfully aware of herself, her body, her size, her nervous breathing. She lowered her eyes shyly. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. Marcus reached into his pocket calmly and placed one familiar handwritten note on the desk. Juliet's eyes widened instantly after recognizing the handwriting. Slowly, she looked back at him in disbelief. "It was you." Marcus nodded quietly. For several seconds, Juliet could not even speak. All this time, the person encouraging her through her pain had been this powerful, handsome billionaire. Tears gathered in her eyes immediately. "Why?" she whispered emotionally. Marcus looked at her with honesty so gentle it frightened her heart. "Because everybody saw your body," he said softly. "But I saw your strength." Juliet looked away quickly, overwhelmed by emotion. Nobody had ever spoken to her that way before. Marcus visited her bakery often after that day. At first, Juliet remained nervous around him. Whenever he entered the bakery, workers secretly stared because the famous billionaire kept visiting the once mocked fat girl everybody knew online. Marcus never seemed to care. He sat with Juliet for hours, talking about life, business, childhood memories, and dreams.
Slowly, Juliet realized something strange about him. He listened carefully whenever she spoke. He never interrupted her, never mocked her insecurities, never stared at her body with hidden disgust the way other men did. One evening, while they sat together inside the bakery after closing hours, Marcus suddenly looked at her and asked calmly, "Will you go on a date with me?" Juliet nearly dropped the cup she was holding. "A date?" she repeated nervously. Marcus smiled. "Yes, a proper one." Juliet laughed awkwardly and looked down immediately. "Marcus, people like you don't date women like me." Marcus became serious instantly. "And what kind of woman is that?" Juliet hesitated painfully. "You know," she whispered quietly while touching her stomach unconsciously. Marcus leaned forward softly. "Juliet, I asked you on a date because I like you, not because of your size, not despite your size, simply because of you."
Juliet's chest tightened emotionally. Nobody had ever spoken to her with such sincerity before. The night of the date, Juliet spent almost 2 hours trying to choose an outfit. Fear kept whispering inside her mind. What if people laugh at them together? What if Marcus becomes embarrassed by her in public? What if this is all a mistake? When Marcus finally arrived to pick her up, Juliet almost forgot how to breathe. He looked unbelievably handsome standing at her door holding flowers. But what shocked her more was the way he looked at her as though she was the most beautiful woman in the room. "You look amazing," he said honestly. Juliet blushed nervously. "You don't have to lie to me." Marcus smiled gently. "I wasn't lying." They arrived at one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. The place was filled with wealthy people, soft music, and cameras flashing occasionally from curious customers who recognized Marcus immediately. Juliet's nervousness returned at once. She held her purse tightly while following Marcus toward their table. "Relax," Marcus whispered softly after noticing her discomfort. Juliet forced a small smile and slowly tried to sit down. Then suddenly, crack! The chair broke violently beneath her weight. The sound echoed loudly across the restaurant. For one horrifying second, silence filled the room. Then laughter exploded everywhere. Some people covered their mouths while others openly pointed at Juliet. A few customers quickly pulled out their phones to record. Juliet froze completely.
Her face burned with humiliation as old trauma crashed back into her chest all at once. The beach video, the cruel comments, the endless laughter. Her breathing became shaky. Tears immediately gathered in her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered brokenly while trying to stand quickly. But Marcus remained calm. Slowly, he stood up from his seat. The warmth disappeared from his face as he looked around the restaurant coldly. "Anyone laughing at her," he said firmly, "should pray life never makes them vulnerable too." Instantly, silence swallowed the room. Nobody moved. Nobody laughed again. Marcus then walked calmly to another table, collected an extra chair himself, and gently placed it beside the remaining chair. Carefully, without rushing or making Juliet feel ashamed, he adjusted both seats together to make her comfortable. Then he looked at her softly and held out his hand. "Come," he said gently. "Sit." Juliet stared at him in disbelief while tears rolled quietly down her cheeks. There was no embarrassment in his eyes, no disgust, no pity, only care. Slowly she sat down, while Marcus continued the date normally, as though nothing humiliating had happened. He poured her water calmly and continued their conversation with complete peace. Juliet could barely focus on the food anymore because her heart felt too full. All her life, men had made her feel unwanted, ugly, and ashamed of herself. But sitting across from Marcus that night, Juliet experienced something she had never truly felt before. Worthy. Life has a strange way of changing people's positions without warning. The same Vanessa who once laughed the loudest at Juliet slowly began watching her own life fall apart piece by piece. It started with rumors inside the company where she worked. Missing money, altered documents, suspicious transfers. Vanessa tried to deny everything at first, but the evidence became too heavy to hide. One Monday morning, security officers walked her out of the building while workers watched silently from their offices. The humiliation spread quickly online because someone recorded the incident. Suddenly, the confident woman who once mocked others became the latest topic of gossip. Friends disappeared immediately. The same people who drank expensive wine with Vanessa stopped answering her calls.
Her landlord threatened to throw her out over unpaid rent. Bills piled up on her table, while rejection emails filled her inbox daily. For the first time in her life, Vanessa understood what it meant to feel abandoned. One rainy afternoon, she sat alone inside her dark apartment, staring hopelessly at Juliet's smiling face on television during another bakery interview. Tears gathered slowly in Vanessa's eyes. "How did life turn around like this?" she whispered painfully. After several days of struggling, Vanessa finally gathered enough courage to visit Juliet's bakery. Her hands trembled the entire journey there. Shame followed her like a shadow. The moment workers recognized her at the entrance, uncomfortable whispers filled the room immediately. Everybody knew what Vanessa had done to Juliet years ago. Vanessa lowered her eyes as one worker walked upstairs to call Juliet. A few minutes later, Juliet appeared quietly at the top of the staircase, wearing a simple, elegant dress. For one awkward moment, both women simply stared at each other silently. Vanessa almost could not recognize her anymore. The same insecure woman who once laughed painfully through humiliation now carried herself with calm confidence and peace. Juliet walked toward her gently. "Vanessa," she said softly. Vanessa swallowed hard before speaking. "I know I don't deserve to be here." Her voice cracked immediately. I don't know where else to go anymore." Juliet remained quiet, waiting patiently. Vanessa's eyes slowly filled with tears. "Nobody wants to help me," she whispered shakily. "Everybody disappeared after I lost my job." She laughed bitterly through tears. "Funny, isn't it? I used to think I had so many friends." Juliet's expression softened sadly because she understood that kind of loneliness too well. Vanessa wiped her face quickly and looked down in shame. "I know you probably hate me," she said quietly. "After everything we did to you, maybe I deserve it." Juliet stayed silent for a few seconds before speaking calmly. "Come inside first." Vanessa was surprised. Juliet led her upstairs into a private office and offered her water gently. Vanessa could barely hold the glass properly because her hands shook badly. "I'm sorry," she whispered suddenly before bursting into tears. "I'm so sorry, Juliet." Years of guilt poured out of her all at once.
We destroyed your confidence. We laughed at your pain. I kept pretending it was jokes, but deep down I knew we were cruel. Juliet listened quietly while Vanessa cried uncontrollably before her. "Sometimes I replay those moments in my head," Vanessa sobbed, "and I hate myself for the kind of person I was." Juliet's own eyes became emotional, but her voice remained calm. "Pain changes people," she said softly. Vanessa looked at her helplessly. "I wasn't expecting forgiveness," she admitted. "I only came because I'm desperate." Juliet sat quietly for a moment before opening a file on her desk. "My second bakery branch is opening soon," she said gently. "I need someone to help manage customer relations and staff scheduling." Vanessa stared in disbelief. "What?" Juliet pushed the file toward her calmly. "It's a job offer." Vanessa's mouth trembled open. "Juliet, after everything we did to you, why would you help me?" Juliet looked at her quietly before answering the words that will remain in Vanessa's heart forever. "Because becoming successful means nothing if pain turns you cruel." Vanessa completely broke down after hearing those words. She covered her face and cried harder than before, while Juliet simply sat beside her quietly. For the first time in many years, Vanessa understood the true difference between beauty and goodness.